All right, good afternoon, class. Today we will be studying poetry and beginning our poetry unit. To start, we'll be looking at world literature, so we're starting with Spanish literature, and then we'll be talking about what poetry is and learning about imagery and personification and other important types of figurative language. And then we will go ahead and actually read the poem, talk a little bit what it's about, learn some of the historical context behind the poem and when it was written. And then you guys will get to, find the figurative language in the poem and talk about the meaning and learn what the poem is about. So now we'll just have a short discussion about that and a little bit of what else we're going to be doing today. So based off that video and from your own personal experience, who can give me their personal definition of poetry? Just whatever comes to mind. There's no right or wrong answers. Just when you hear the word poetry, what do you think of? Amanda?
Like a lot of sentences that rhyme, that tell you a message.
Rhyming, good. Rhyming and messages. What else? So in the poem that we're going to be reading today, we're going to be studying two specific kinds of figurative language. And the first is going to be imagery. Also going to be looking at personification. Good. Are there any questions about what we have talked about with poetry, imagery, or personification before we move on to the actual poem? No? Okay. So now we're going to be reading Apologia Profita Sua by Luis Cernuda, which you will also be studying in your Spanish and art classes later. So this particular poem, Apologia Profita Sua, is reflecting on his life and his behavior throughout his life, especially relationships with his family and friends, and also reflecting a little bit on his death. Now this is a very long poem, but we're just going to focus on a short 12-line stanza of the poem. And today we're only going to be looking at the first half of the poem. Tomorrow in class we're going to finish up the rest of the poem and look at the second half. But this poem, like I said, was written by Luis Cernuda, who was born in 1902 and died in 1963. And he was born in Seville, Spain. So obviously he's a Spanish poet. And this poem is included in a collection of poems called Como quien espera el alba, which means who will wait for the dawn. So I will be giving you guys a copy of the poem to read along and to take any notes. We will be focusing on the blue lines today and the lines tomorrow. Okay. Well, in these first three lines, we'll just focus on that to start. It is well that this blood of the earth bathes and pardons the dying man, and with pure oil traces the magic sign. So in these three lines, there are two different liquids that we can kind of sense. We know how they smell, we know how they feel to the touch, we know what they look like. So who can point those out? Just raise your hand in. Aubrey. Good, the pure oil, and what else? Hannah. Good, the blood of the earth. So after looking at the pure oil and the blood of the earth, the words that follow, the blood of the earth bathes and pardons, the pure oil traces. So when we see that, what do you think of? What figurative language term could we also talk about today that would be an example of? Hannah. Yes, that would be an example of personification. So knowing that this poem has a lot to do with Luis Cernuda's life and his feelings and his behavior with his family and friends, is there anything that we can interpret specifically from these 6 lines, and how does the imagery and personification help give meaning to the poem?
But he sees the better in life.
That's really good.